Welcome back to the shop, friends. I got an exciting video for you today. I'm going to show you the finished workbench, but first, let's finish the project. On the last episode, you watched as I attached the apron boards to the bench and glued up the workbench surface to the right side of the apron. The next day I actually pulled down the clamps and then I proceeded to drilling some holes into the aprons through the legs to attach some lag bolts. I used a 1-inch auger bit to remove a small amount of material to hide the heads of the lag bolts. Then I used a smaller 3/4 bit and drilled through the apron into the legs. The lag bolt heads were slightly bigger than the 1-inch auger bit head, so I chiseled out a small amount of material to hide the head and to allow it to be below the surface of the aprons. I inserted the lag bolts and put on a large washer and tightened down a nut, and it really tightened down the bench and made it much more stiff. Using my bit and brace, I drilled holes through the undersurface of the bare board on the legs, through or into the workbench surface, and then attached lag screws through the workbench surface. The screws were 2.5 inches, leaving plenty of room to plane the top of the bench without worrying about hitting the screws underneath. Next, I proceeded to fitting the tool well boards into the area for that. The tool well that I had milled prior was slightly wider than the area that I was to put it into, so I used hand planes and milled down that about a 1/2 inch. It was definitely a tight fit, but with a little elbow grease, I was able to put the tool well into position and then proceed to screw it down as well. After assembly, I moved on to beveling the edges of the aprons to give it a more decorative touch. I used my Japanese saw to easily cut that portion off, and then I used my hand plane to clean it up a little bit. Once the workbench was fully assembled and dimensioned, I proceeded to removing my old vise from my old workbench. I removed the lag screws from the undersurface of the old workbench and then removed the old oak jaws from the vise. One of the jaws was broken, so I do plan to make some new ones for it. I took the vise and clamped it to the new bench and then proceeded to tracing around it so I could remove the material to allow it to let into the bench. I used my bent brace with a 1-inch auger bit to remove as much material as I could to reduce the amount of chiseling I needed to do. The 1-inch auger bit made short work of drilling through the apron surface of the bench. Just took a little bit of chisel work to remove the remaining material. That way I could insert the vise into the hole there and proceed to attaching it to the bench. I used my granddad's drill and was able to drill out the holes to attach the lag screws to fasten the vise to the undersurface of the workbench. Once the vise was installed, I was able to mill up the pieces of cherry that I had left over from building a cutting board in the past. I used some rubber cement and attached the vise jaws to the vise. Again, using my drill, I drilled out 2 holes and then inserted screws to fasten the vise to the jaws. Once the jaws were in place, I was able to plane the top of the vise jaws to be level or to be even with the top surface of my workbench. I wanted the surface of the vise jaws to be soft, therefore they wouldn't mar the surface of any projects I was working on, so I took some scrap pieces of leather and cut those to fit and then added some rubber cement to the smooth surface of the leather and attached that to the jaws. I rolled those on to get a good contact and then clamped down the vise for a brief period to allow the glue to set. Once the glue is set, then I used my knife and trimmed the leather to the exact surface of the vise jaws. Once the vise was finished, I moved on to drilling out the dog holes. Using a 3/4 inch auger bit, I drilled those out with my brace and bit. That was actually no small task, using the brace and bit, drilling numerous holes through a 3-inch bench. I thought that the holes actually turned out pretty nice, however. The final portion of the project was to apply some boiled linseed oil, and the bench was complete. Here it is, guys, 5 months in the making, my brand new workbench. Let me give you some dimensions and then we'll take a tour. The final length of the bench turned out to be 60 inches. The width is 27 1/4. The actual workbench portion is 13 inches and the height is 34 1/4. The same height as my other workbenches as well. I am 5'10" to 5'11", and that's a perfect height for me to plane boards, especially ones that are a little bit taller than the bench. Let me grab the camera and I'll give you a closer look. Well, there it is, guys, in all its glory, freshly coated in boiled linseed oil. As you can see, the dog holes turned out pretty nice, very little tear out for a hand tool using the bracing bit. The vise turned out really nice. It is cherry and it is actually veneered with leather to keep from marring the surface of boards that I'm planing. My vise will open to a total of 8 3/4 inches with the thick cherry jaws in place. The tool well is 2 inches exactly in depth, and it is 11 1/2 inches in width. That should provide plenty of space to store my commonly used hand tools, and hopefully will prevent any tools from falling on the floor. As you can see, the edge of the workbench turned out really nice, cut only with hand tools, a hand saw. The final thickness of the actual workable portion of the bench is just over 3 inches. The back side of the bench will provide a place that I can clamp longer boards that I'm edge planing. I may eventually put some hold fast there to hold boards there, but for now I can just clamp them against the edge. The dog holes are going to make planing boards much easier. As you can see here, I've clamped a piece of scrap cherry in my vise against 2 dogs, and they are below the surface of the wood, so as I'm planing it, I don't risk hitting my blades on the brass dogs. This is going to make edge planing boards and flattening boards much easier. The dog holes along the length of the bench will provide a place to clamp boards, and lengthwise I will eventually put a vise on the end of the bench. That way I can clamp boards from the vise down the length of the bench. That way I can flatten boards that are longer than just the foot or 2 that I can put in the vise here. This bench will actually allow me to flatten boards up to about 5 1/2 to 6 foot. Well, that's it for the workbench series, guys. I really appreciate you all watching this build. It's been an enormous amount of fun for me building it with only hand tools. I've certainly learned a lot and become much more proficient, I think, in using hand planes and hand saws and chisels. I would say that I spent no more than $150 in wood for this project. Everything was built out of construction grade lumber, Douglas fir, southern yellow pine, and I did use some leftover poplar timbers I had from building the sawhorses a few years ago. They were 4x6s that I planed down to 3x5 for this project. I'd like to give a shout out to the Tradesman channel and the Great Plains Craftsman for sort of mentoring me through my short time on YouTube. They've been helping me a lot to improve my content to you and to be a better videographer. I'm really looking forward to using this workbench for future projects. I would love for you to leave in the comments what you think should be the first hand tool project on the bench. I'm looking forward to doing that. So anyhow, thanks for watching the series. Thanks for watching my video. I'd really appreciate it if you give me a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks again.